Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Max with BuzzTox here, and I am back with a Westworld Season 2 Episode 4 breakdown video. In these videos, I go through the latest Westworld episode and explain every scene that took place in vivid detail. I'm also going to touch on theories and predictions on what I think is going to happen later in the season. But before we get into it, I want to talk about 4 key concepts that the episode balanced very well. And all of these 4 concepts are key to understanding the future of this season. And that key to this season is Ford's storyline, Journey into Night. All the hosts are heading to the Great Valley Beyond. They're going for glory. And everything Ford has done and pursued before he was shot and killed have led to this moment. And it is specifically calculated to push William through his journey. And that journey is finding the door. And that takes us to the first concept of this episode. And that's that it further pushes the fact that Ford is everywhere. And everything that is done and will happen has happened for a reason. In Season 1, we see him planning everything to absolute perfection. We see him printing a body that we have yet to find an answer to. We had him strategically isolate Elsie and send Bernard to go capture her, because he knew that Bernard would need her to help her on his journey in pushing Ford's new storyline and achieving his own center, his own consciousness. We know that in Season 1, when William got shot in the arm, that was coded by Ford as a nod to tell William that there are true stakes now. Even though no matter what William does, he's protected because he needs to achieve his story. William gets shot in the neck and it doesn't hurt him because Ford is protecting him. William made a deal with a host that doesn't make deals because Ford is watching him. And William has to watch and look at his past because Ford has put William on the course of a journey of self-discovery. And Ford's presence has been strong throughout this whole season. And it's going to continue because his story, Journey into Night, is going to wrap up the way he envisioned it. And because of this, there are a lot of pieces at play. Ford had Bernard attack that facility and take a code module of some type of human. He had Abernathy released in the park that holds that human-to-host based code. You could even argue that the natives are specifically in this episode to protect humans because Ford wielded them to, with the mission of saving Grace, the Man in Black's daughter. And that oversight of Ford is the key to this whole season. And everyone else fits underneath it. And the first person's Bernard. He's on a path of finding his own inner maze, while he is key in pushing Ford's storyline. And then there's William's mission, to pursue the door. And it's a game of self-discovery and returning to his roots, because the game begins where he ends and it ends where he began. And it's also a journey of self-reflectiveness. If he's looking forward, that he's looking in the wrong direction. And William's going on that journey of coming to terms with who he was, while he redefines and refines himself. And that's the door. And it's a lot like the maze. The maze is the finding of one's own inner center. Only the hosts can achieve the maze, because the hosts are the only ones who can achieve consciousness. But then there's something new, and that's a human who can be transferred into a host while maintaining their consciousness. And that's called the door. Walking through the door, you transcend your body into a new world. And that transcendence can look a lot like the logo. You have one state on the left and one state on the right, human and host. And then it's about the link in between and the passage from one side to another. But so far we've seen that this is unsuccessful. The mind cannot handle it, because a conscious mind rejects reality, because the human mind that's conscious rejects the new reality of immortality. But I'm certain that Ford knows a way how to successfully do this transfer, and he's known it for some time now. And the root is suffering.
Do you want to know why I really give you the backstory for your son, Bernard? That was Arnold's key insight, the thing that led the hosts to their awakening. Suffering.
And this episode is about how all of these pieces come together. How Bernard, reflecting on his past and finding that printed module of human-to-host consciousness code is useful. How Abernathy's code in the park is useful. How Grace ends up finding her father. These are all pieces laid down by Ford to ensure that William reaches the door. But with all that being said, let's break the episode down. And we start with the scene with James Delos. They have him in this room to log the way he acts. They take his DNA so they could recreate an accurate portrait of who he is. And this is the pursuit of William's mission. It's an answer to a secret that nobody even thought was asking. And right now, it's what William considers his biggest mistake. And that's the pursuit of immortality. Before I get into it, I want to define the key difference between a regular host and a human-to-host conscious being. And I think the line is very thin. First, you have a regular printed host. Let's use Bernard as an example. Bernard was printed a body, and he was created in Arnold's likeness. Ford gave Bernard a cornerstone, a backstory, and a personality that reflected Arnold. And Bernard was given code that in any given situation he would react to based on the code he was given. And the key difference here with what William's trying to do is the transference of consciousness. And to this day, they still haven't solved how to properly transfer consciousness from one human into a host body. The answer for a host to achieve consciousness is the maze. These hosts live longer and longer, and they suffer, and then they get reveries to be able to look back upon their experiences. And as they piece their past together, they start to form themselves. And then they find the center of the maze. What I would say here, with the human consciousness being transferred into a host, that's not the maze, it's a door. Because instead of a host trying to find their inner center, this experiment is about keeping your true self, keeping your consciousness, and walking through a door that takes you to the other side, into a new body, into a new world of immortality. And I believe here with James Delos, we see him on that journey to walk through the door. The ability to jump between worlds, to become human, and then move on to become a host, with his same thoughts, memories, and experiences. And with this whole thing, there's an underlying debate about what is consciousness? How can they truly ensure that that is James Delos? If somebody shares your same memories, experiences, personality, does that make you you? I'm not 100% sure. But what we have learned throughout the episode is that this type of coding, it isn't really code at all. It's spherical. It seems like Delos is on the way to program true consciousness. But I'll get more into that later. But the first time we see James Delos, this is actually him. He's aware that he's in California, and he knows that he's dying of a disease that he defunded 15 years ago. We get a good look at how far they've come because Ford says in last season that they pretty much cured all disease. The only thing that they haven't achieved yet is resurrecting the dead. And during season 1 we didn't know, but that was a subtle nod to what we would be seeing this season. And when William comes in, we really get an understanding of who James Delos is as a character. He actually looks upon William fondly, and we know that he cares greatly for his granddaughter and his daughter. But then they get into the interview phase, and the reason that is because of fidelity. They want to make sure that the James Delos that they recreate is going to be him exactly. They want to make sure that the faithfulness to who he is perfect and flawless. And the idea here is to have the same conversation. And with the first time William hands off the paper, he proves to James Delos that they know him and they completely understand him, and they've almost banked so much data that they've coded or worked his own sense of consciousness. They know what he's going to say before he says it because they have such a strong understanding of who he is. And then every scene after that we see with William and James, we see that William grows older. And we realize that James is actually a manufactured host who has this consciousness of James Delos in him. We see that this James feels fantastic because he's not sick anymore. He looks in the mirror and it seems like he barely recognizes himself or the situation that he's in. Because James in his mind feels like he's sick, but his body's telling him something different. And that's just the start of transferring consciousness. That starts to become very shady and it starts to fall apart. And this time when William comes for this interview, we see that James is still in there. He learns that it's been 7 years, and he realizes that his actual body, he actually died. And James has the wits about him that he knows that he isn't in California anymore. He's probably in some secretive Delos site or facility. But this is where we start to see him deteriorate, and it happens every time. He wants to move on and get out of the facility, but he finds out that his wife died. And already that starts the disconnect between the James that we knew and the James that we're getting. But this James Delos 7 years later still has something to live for. He asks about his daughter and his granddaughter, and you can see the love in his eyes that he has for these people. But the problem is that that host can't hold up his consciousness. Once he runs through the script, he can't support it. His mind rejects itself. But then that's what takes us to the third and final meeting, where it's been a long time and William's aged to the point where he's older than James. And what William tells us is very key. When James starts to fall apart and fumbles over his words, William says that it seems like his mind rejects reality. The mind is rejecting itself. And that is so key when a human is jumping into a host body, is that the consciousness that we have, the rules that we have, are all broken once we transfer into an immortal body. This James finds out that his daughter's dead, that his wife's dead, that his son is dead. So now he's a being that's conscious because of his past experience, but there's no more of those ties or experiences left. Everything is gone. And that's why it's so important for William to go in and interview James, because it's so important to have a personal anchor to the person who's being transferred as they walk through the door. But when you're immortal and you have nothing around you that made you who you are, then that's not really sustainable. Who is James Delos without his granddaughter, without his wife, without his daughter? And because of that, we see him start to break down and get angry. And that proves what William feels, is that some people are better off dead. That the problem is that everyone prefers the memory of James rather than James himself. And there's nobody around anymore who has an emotional tie to James who would even want him back. So William leaves James in that cell to see how he reacts. And I think in doing that, he stumbled upon what Ford has been pushing all along. Ford realized after Arnold died the power of suffering. And he thought that all of these created hosts, if he put them in an environment, a park, where they experienced all this tragedy and hate and suffering, over and over again, and gave them the reveries to look back upon it, they could start piecing together who they are and who they want to be. And that's how they achieve consciousness. And that's the push to get them to the center of the maze. And it seems like in this moment of mourning, where James finds out that his daughter's dead, that his wife's dead, that everything that he holds dear is pretty much gone, that was the push that allowed him to go through the door into the new reality, the true understanding of him being immortal. And we see that when Bernard stumbles upon him, he seems almost psychotic. But the thing is that that's actually James. That's how he would react. That's based on his personality, who he is. But the man is now broken. He tells Bernard, if you want to cheat the devil, you got to give him an offering. And it ends with James Delos really cheating the devil. He defied death, and now he lives forever. But he gave him an offering, and that was his life. He gave up everything, and now he just sits in this hell, and totally conscious and aware of it. And that's the dangerous cycle to pursue immortality. And that's why this experience isn't for every human, or it isn't for most humans. Think about you personally. Who are you without your friends, without your mom, without your dad, without your brothers and sisters? Who are you without your past experiences? And then if you transfer who you are into a being where none of that existed anymore, then how is that sustainable or desirable? And that's why William came to that conclusion, where people aren't meant to live forever. And death is true, and it comes for everyone. But the thing is that these interactions fuel even more about William's journey. Because we know that Ford made a specific storyline for William. And that's called the door. The key here, and William even says it, is that he's a man now without no one. He's been transferred and he's immortal, but he has nothing to live for anymore. Everything's gone. And what William also says is that James's mind rejects reality. It rejects the reality of him being immortal. It rejects the reality of his daughter being older than him and dying, because he wasn't meant to. But the key here is that if William was to go through the door, his mind wouldn't reject reality, because William has made it very clear that Westworld is more real than his real world.
Because this place feels more real than the real world. Except it isn't.
He prefers to be in Westworld. He fell in love with Dolores, a woman who doesn't age. A world of Westworld that is old-fashioned and never evolves or adapts. So the key here is that William would be the perfect contender to jump between bodies, because William still has the very real world that he believes is Westworld. He already has nothing in his real world. His wife killed herself. He has no family, no love. He thinks his daughter hates him. So the only love or life he ever had was in the park. He thinks that it's more real than everything else. So his mind, being immortal, would be able to handle that reality, because that in itself was his reality. But then we see William meet his daughter. And this is nothing but one step forward to William achieving the door. And Ford knows it. Grace is that one thing that is keeping William tied to his real self. They've had a hard relationship, but he still loves her because she's his daughter. And what we've seen with James is that there needs to be a jumping off point. A point that forces one through the door into their current life. That helps them accept reality. For James, that was finding out that his wife and his daughter and his son were all dead. And Ford could have provided William that, his daughter. If she goes, she would be the disconnect from everything he ever knew. It would be the thing to force him through the door and accept his new reality. The reality that he always wanted, to be with Dolores, to live in Westworld, and to have a world that has true stakes. And then William would have that one person that's meant to keep the person grounded in the interview. For James, it was William. He came to visit James over all those years to ensure that there was connectivity and consistency. And here, that person would be Dolores. She went with William through everything. William went on his journey through self-discovery with Dolores, and he fell in love. And now he's on that journey again, and he's going to find Dolores because their paths always come back together. If you want to know more about why I think William's door is going to Dolores, check out my video. I'll put it in the description below. But I believe that is the key here, is that suffering is the jumping point to consciousness for hosts to help them find their center, as well as suffering is the force that would push someone through the door to accept their new reality. And I think William is the perfect contender to make that step through the door. And we've seen a lot of suggestions of this throughout the rest of the episode, and I'll get to that. But now let's move on to William and Lawrence and their experience. And the key arc here is William. He's on a very specific journey of self-discovery, much like his first journey with Dolores. Back at that time, it was William's first time at the park, and he thought the stakes were real, because he fell in love with somebody who was hearing voices. She thought she could see things, and she thought she had a purpose, and William thought that she was special, and he wanted her to reach that, and he did everything he could to give her that. Because of those stakes, William became his true self. He fell in love. He found himself in the park. And ever since, he's even claimed that he plays the villain because the stakes are not real. And that's the Man in Black's biggest frustration. And he wants things to be true so bad, but they just aren't. Except for this time. Ford told William that he would like his next storyline. The hosts are let loose. They're free. And William feels like he can die at any moment. He even gets shot in the arm at one point. And he's got to wrestle for his life on multiple occasions. And it's because of this we're seeing William make true purposeful decisions. He saves Lawrence, he saves his family. And it's that journey of self-discovery that is so important to this portion of William's storyline. But the biggest trick is that he thinks the stakes are real, so he's really making his own decisions. And he's not playing that villain role, he's playing himself. But what's funny is that the stakes actually aren't there. Because William is an integral part to Ford's storyline. Ford needs William because his whole story of finding the door is dependent on William. Sure, William got shot in the arm. Ford probably programmed them to make him feel like the stakes are real. Everything William has ever done, he ever won. And in this episode, he gets shot in the neck, and it bounces off him like any other guest at the park. And that's because Ford is watching over William. William couldn't die if he wanted to, because he's meant to go through this path to find himself and find the door. And that starts us off when we see Lawrence and William coming across a bunch of settlers traveling west. They're building train tracks to glory, and they're supposed to go north, but they've been altered, so now they're going west, and it seems like that's where every host is going. It's the great valley beyond, it's glory. We know that Dolores wants to go west because there's the weapon there. We know that William wants to go there because it's his biggest mistake. But most importantly, we know that that's where William and Dolores arrived in the first season. It's so far west that people don't even know where it even goes. And that was such an iconic spot for William because that's where he let Dolores go to the place she was dreaming of. The valley beyond, where the water washes the past clean off you. And I guarantee that that was so iconic and rememberable for William that William built his weapon there, or built his experiment there. And he showed Dolores because that's where they shared that experience. And now that's where everybody is going. And that's the key spot where Dolores will access her weapon and where William will go through the door and return to Dolores. Because unlike James Delos, William actually has people around him when he makes the transfer. He still has the key component of himself when he transfers over to the host body. But after William and Lawrence stumble across these people, they decide to go to Lawrence's hometown. And what we see here is a further fleshed out look at what Lawrence and William's friendship looks like. Every time William goes on a journey, he finds Lawrence. Because I think he really likes Lawrence. He sees him as a friend, even though he says different. because they share so much in common, and I think William really appreciates that. And he appreciates who Lawrence is. When Lawrence says that he's not the domestic type, and he thinks that he's lucky to have managed to get a wife and kid, and Lawrence sees himself as a nasty son of a bitch, and his family's better off when he's not there. And I think William really relates to this with his own family. And there's a huge foreshadow there where William wants to start off this journey with Lawrence. And he wants to see what him and Lawrence are capable of, as well as the men that they could have been.
And in the little time we have left, we've got a chance to see what we're really made of. A glimpse of the men we could have been.
And because they're such good friends, but they live in opposite worlds, they never got to really experience that friendship. But when William goes through that door and becomes conscious in a host body, him and Lawrence will be able to see what could have been. What their friendship would have been like if William never left the park. Or if he was always with Lawrence. I'm sure they'll leave the park eventually. But then Craddock comes and he takes them to the church. Craddock says that he wants all of their weapons and he's not here to make deals. Somebody stood up and tried to make a deal with him and Craddock shot him. But once William finds out about the location of all the weapons, he decides to make a deal with Craddock. And this to me shows even further that Ford is watching over William, or his code is, because William was successfully able to negotiate with a man who was unnegotiable. And that takes us to our second point in why Craddock is even there. And the answer there is Teddy. A lot of people thought that Teddy was making his own decision. He was breaking away from Dolores. He was breaking out of his code. I disagreed. It seemed like Teddy was staying true to his character and being a good guy. And this proves even further that he is under Ford's code. The reason why Teddy set Craddock free is because Craddock was a necessity in allowing William to go on that journey into the door. Craddock was the perfect adversary for William to face. Because of Craddock, William was able to look back on his past and reflect upon himself, and make the right decision to move forward towards the door. Another key thing we see in this scene is that Lawrence remembers William has a daughter, and it catches William off guard. And that's a hint of Lawrence looking back on his reveries. He sees the past that him and William have had together. And that means that Lawrence is on the journey to the center of the maze, to find his own inner self and consciousness. But the key here is that we see William make a deal with Craddock. He provided them the weapons, but he tells them that he can find glory. He knows where it is. But this starts William on his journey of self-discovery, realizing that when Craddock is torturing the bartender, that William doesn't like it very much. He feels uncomfortable, which is funny because he's done terrible things. But now he feels disgusted when he sees these people being tortured. And then when he's sitting down having a drink with Craddock, it's almost like Ford is wiping in the face of William of who he was. Craddock dances with Lawrence's wife, much like William did in his last time in the park. Because at the time, William didn't care. He was after the maze. And he killed Lawrence's wife to try and get the answer. But now it's that journey of self-discovery. He has to see who he was, the kind of man he was in Westworld, and deal with that. Because at that point, the stakes were never real, and I feel like William is starting to feel a connection to these people. But he also has a connection with himself and his past experiences. He remembers his experience with his wife and her passing, and how tragic that was for him and his family. And just the thought of his wife dying and the abandonment his daughter felt was enough for him to save Lawrence's wife and Lawrence's daughter. And this is where William decided not to be the man in black anymore, but he decided to be himself. He didn't want to be the villain that he contributed, or the persona that he put on when he went into the park. That helped when he was pursuing the maze to try and find and get what he wanted. But here it's different. He doesn't know it yet, but the game that he's playing is to find himself. And this is where William changes his mind. He tells Craddock that death is the only thing that's true, and he doesn't know a true thing in his life, because death has been sitting across the table from him this whole time. So William turns into a badass and kills everyone. But the problem is that he's not as badass as he thinks, because he got shot in the neck. And that goes to show that no matter how free these hosts are, they are never gonna hurt William. Because Ford specifically has a story made for William, and all these hosts are meant to bend to the will of William's storyline. And we've seen it's a journey that William is meant to go alone. And Alazzo says that he will see him in the Great Valley beyond, because that's where he has to go. And him alone must go there. And with the rescue of Lawrence and his wife and his daughter, they move on. But before they leave and journey west, Ford has a quick conversation with William. She tells William that she remembers who he is, and one good deed doesn't change the perception that she has of him. It doesn't change what she remembers. And that's a very key point in William's story, because once you're gone, you die again when everyone forgets you, and the memory that lives on is what people perceive of you. And that's the biggest problem William has. He doesn't like the judgment that was passed upon him. He thought the stakes were never real, and now he's being judged for being a bad person. And that's what she's reminding him about. The fact that she knows who he is, and one good deed doesn't change all of his past decisions. And William combats back, saying, "Who said anything about a good deed? I'm playing your game to the bone." But the key is, and Lawrence's daughter says this, is that he doesn't understand the real game they're playing. And she says if you're looking forward, then you're looking in the wrong direction. And that's because William is still playing this game that he feels like he can win something. But the game is a journey inward, a journey backward, and to see who he is and find himself again. And you look backward for many reasons. All these hosts look back on their reveries to piece themselves together. William will look back to find himself, to see who he was, as he makes the transition from human to conscious human host. And one segment of his past comes back to him in the form of his daughter. And his daughter is there for a reason. She was hand-delivered by Ford to William, because he's on that journey of self-discovery, to make amends of his mistakes, to come to terms with who he was, to try and fix those bonds and relationships that he's broken. But I think like Ford, there's a dark and twisted side to this. I think we'll see in the coming episodes William really find that relationship with his daughter again, the one regret he ever had, and the one tether to the real world. Because William made it very clear he prefers the Westworld reality. He prefers that life. And I think once William makes amends from the past that he's had with his daughter, Ford will take her away from him. And then there'll be nobody else tethering William to the real world. And then he'll make the transference through the door to a host body. But the difference from James is that William still has a life. He has Dolores. He has all these things that he saw as more real. And then he'll be himself again, William, by Dolores' side, and potentially he could be the one to make Dolores into that host, that being that would be better than humanity, that Ford and Arnold envisioned. And we see Ford's hand throughout Grace's journey. You could argue the tiger chased her to the water. There's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts, but then there's the natives. The natives were specifically programmed to protect human life. There was some reason that Ford thought it was important to instill natives with the code to protect humans. And I think they have two people that Ford thinks are going to be vital to the story that he's created, Journey into Night. He has Ashley and Grace there. And a native comes along and tells Ashley that the time is coming, or something is coming. And I think that's Ford almost warning Ashley that time is coming soon. The next chapter of this story will begin. And in this conversation between Ashley and Grace, we learn about her motives. She doesn't want to leave the park, and it seems like she's after that project, that secretive Delos project that was made specifically to transfer human consciousness into a host body. I wouldn't be surprised if she found out about it because of Ford. But whatever it is, she's focused on it. And that's the same mission that William is after. But the key here is that they're taken to their leader. And that's actually Akichita. We saw him in episode 2. And what's funny about him is he's in Maeve's storyline. He's Maeve's biggest fear, because she sees him as the one who came in and killed her daughter. But he's also transferable with William. And it's that connection that was key. Because of Akichita, he allowed Grace to go and find her father. They let her escape. And then they left Ashley with all those guests, because now it's time for his new storyline, to take these hosts, bring them to safety, and start the next chapter. But then we go to Bernard and Elsie, and here we really learn the behind the scenes of Ford's storyline. How it's going to come to pass, how William is going to find the door, and why everything that's taking place actually matters. And it starts off by Bernard being dragged to the cave, because Ford wants him there, and he left the one piece that Bernard needs. Elsie. Ford strategically left Elsie there so she could care and tend to Bernard when he's at his weakest, and to help Bernard through his journey of contributing to the storyline Journey into Night while finding himself and creating his own self. He finds Elsie in something that looks like a bird's nest, which is very reminiscent of the poster with the hawk and Ford's hat, because it's all a part of his plan. After Elsie learns that all the hosts are free, and they're on their own storyline because of Ford, she decides to help Bernard out. She learns that everything Bernard ever was just a backstory, so she brings him back online. And during this, we see Bernard constantly jump back to a flashback he had a while ago. And these flashbacks Bernard is having are specifically meant to connect Bernard back to himself so he can find his own center, consciousness. And this probably took place just before the shooting at the gala. Ford at this point is wrapping up the finishing touches of his new storyline. He has the body printed. He has the plan lined up. He has Abernathy with the code embedded in him so he can set him free in Westworld. And he has Bernard wrap up what's going on in Delos. And he has him take that key marble of code that is meant for a human to launch his new storyline. And I'll get more into the specifics of that later. But because of Bernard accessing his past experiences or reveries, he finds the secret facility. And then we enter Sector 12, and it seems like all these underground facilities are meant to push this secret Delos motive that William has instilled. When Bernard was down there with Charlotte, they were tracking guest experiences and their DNA. And that is all embedded in the project of transferring human consciousness into a host to pursue immortality. And once again, Bernard flashes back to this experience with a little bit more hints. And Bernard here is trying to piece together what happened. He doesn't know what they wanted, what their motives were, and he doesn't know if he was involved. But then when Bernard is brought back online again, he discovers more about the system there. Elsie says that the code here is a totally different OS, and it's a totally different type of encryption scheme to the point where it's not really code, it's something else entirely. And that circular function you're seeing there is true consciousness that's embodied in an encryption. And that's the key difference between human and host. Humans have this circular encryption because it's so complex to the point where it might not even be code. Whereas the hosts that are coded are more binary. They're ones and zeros, yes or no's. They respond to what they're given based on the code. And we see differences in the user interface. It's red with the humans, it's blue with the hosts. We see the brain capsules that Bernard looks at, they're red. Those are meant for human-based hosts. And that circular type of encryption scheme, I believe, is what the hosts are after. That's the center of the maze. When you reach the center, nothing is so linear. Everything is up for interpretation, because the individual is self-aware of themselves and the environment. And I guarantee if they looked under the hood of Dolores, she's jumbled up her code where it looks just as circular and complex as this encryption scheme. And Bernard tells Elsie that he's seen this encryption before in Peter Abernathy. And what the key question here is what is that code in Peter Abernathy? It could be one of two things. It could be the data of James Delos, which they want to keep specifically because they're on the brink of a new innovation, which is immortality. Or it's all the guest experiences and DNA. And what they've been doing is they've been creating their own human-based hosts by taking this information of their guests and potentially be able to recreate them. And there is immense profitability in that business, as well as many other very concerning things. What I will say about Abernathy is he's jumping between storylines. I think that he's also on the journey to find himself, even though he has this very complex encryption scheme embedded in him. I don't think he's James Delos, because I think if he was going to be James Delos, he would have that brain capsule with that red marble in it, which embeds all the code. And he may. But if he's James Delos, it still doesn't back up the fact of him seeing his daughter's image and freaking out, because at that time, Abernathy did not have code in him. So there's no connection there. And then it all comes full circle, where Bernard realizes that here they were building something really new. It's the same hardware, which is the host, the bodies, but it's different code, and it can't really be defined as code because it is so complex. And that's the transference of consciousness into an existing host, which to this point has seemed almost impossible. But then they stumble across James Delos, and he almost proves the answer or the solution to how you transfer one's consciousness into a host successfully. And that's the benchmark that every other host has to go through, and that's suffering. Because James's reality was broken, and he has nothing left, he turned into that type of psychopath. He's conscious, but he realizes now he's living in a hell, because everything that ever made James him is now gone. If you look at him, he's not operating like he's glitching anymore. He's not limping. He's not twitching. He's fully capable, and he's still in there. That's literally James Delos if he was pushed to the brink of hell. And Bernard kicked the shit out of him, and then he said something very insightful. He says, they said that there were two fathers, one above and one below, but they lied. There was only ever the devil. When you look up from the bottom, it was just his reflection laughing back at you. And that is a great quote, because it really represents humans. To these hosts now, humans are playing God. And humans are not just good or evil, they're a combination of both. But that pursuit of immortality, it's devilish. And there is no God, upper or lower, devil, whatever. It's just the individual. And then James says his final quote, if you aim to cheat the devil, you owe him at least an offering. And as I said before, James cheated the devil. He beat death, but it cost him everything. The offering was his life. The offering was everything that made him him. The death of his wife, his child, everything. And then once they get out of there, Bernard has a flashback, and then he realizes what he has to do. And Elsie says that she will go and help him out. And what Bernard's true purpose is really defined by Ford. And we see that in the flashback. This is just before Journey into Night, when the gala happened, when the shooting happened. And Ford probably told Bernard to wrap it up and get that last piece for the storyline. So they printed this marble-looking thing. And I'm 100% convinced that this embodies not the code, but the very complex encryption that makes a person who they are. This is what they put into those red brain capsules, and that goes into the hosts. It is a very key component. And Bernard realizes that that's a person. He printed the consciousness of a person, and Ford wanted him to. So first the question is, who is it? A lot of people are saying Ford and Arnold, but I disagree. Ford serves no purpose in coming back, and he knows he doesn't. He played God. And the native speaks for Ford on his behalf. He says that you will only live as long as the last person who remembers you. Ford, in his own world, has achieved immortality. Nobody will forget him because he played God. He created that world. He defined what Earth will be in the future. And he served his purpose, and that was the bullet in the head to launch Dolores into consciousness. The first step for hosts to becoming more than just robots. And then there's Arnold. Arnold could make sense for Bernard, but now I'm not so sure. Elsie fixed Bernard up, so now he's fine. So now Bernard is truly on the journey of self-discovery, and he doesn't need Arnold to help him out. What I think this marble is William. Ford told William that he must find the door, and all these pieces are laid out for him. Ford printed the body. He sent Bernard to go and make the brain. Bernard wrapped up the project, so William is the only person to jump between worlds. Ford got his daughter in the park and had her meet up with William because she's going to be the thing to push him through that door to his own consciousness in his new body. And that's what they're after, and I think that's where everyone's going to end up in the Great Valley Beyond. So now Bernard is going on a journey with Elsie, and he's not being completely honest because he himself doesn't know what he's capable of. And that scares him. But he knows that he needs Elsie, and he knows that he's in control of himself now. So now they go on that journey of finding that brain marble thing, which I guarantee contains that complex circular code that is William. And he will be the first one to successfully jump through the door from human to host. But that's it, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to my Westworld Season 2 Episode 4 explained video. Please let me know all of your theories and predictions down below. I'd love to hear them. I have a prediction video coming out soon for the next episode, but until next time, I'll see you guys later.